Imagine being told to build the largest stone structure on Earth, without cranes, without trucks, without modern machines, and without electricity. Now imagine doing it more than 4,500 years ago. Some of the stones weigh several tons. Millions of blocks had to be moved, lifted, and placed with incredible precision. So how did the ancient Egyptians actually build the pyramids? And why does the Great Pyramid still leave people wondering how humans managed to build something this massive? Stay until the end, because every story may sound familiar. Until I tell it to you. It all begins in ancient Egypt, around 4,500 years ago. The Egyptians were building something that would completely change history. A massive stone pyramid for Pharaoh Khufu, the Great Pyramid of Giza. At the time, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth, and it would remain that way for thousands of years. But here's the incredible part. The Egyptians didn't have modern construction equipment, no bulldozers, no cranes, no steel machinery. So, where did they even begin? The first step wasn't building upward. It was choosing the right location. The pyramid had to be built on extremely stable ground, and the Egyptians chose the Giza Plateau. Then came one of the most important parts of the entire project, the foundation. The builders needed an incredibly level surface, because if the foundation was wrong, every layer above it would become a problem. And the Egyptians were remarkably good at measuring. They used simple tools, geometry, observation of the stars, and careful surveying to create an almost perfectly aligned structure. Then, the real challenge began. The stones. Most of the blocks used to build the Great Pyramid were made from limestone. And we're not talking about a few hundred blocks. We're talking about millions. Each one had to be extracted, transported, and placed. So how could ancient workers move something that weighed several tons? One answer was wooden sledges. Instead of trying to lift massive stones into the air, workers could place them on sledges and drag them across the ground. And there's an interesting clue that supports this idea. Ancient Egyptian artwork shows workers pulling heavy objects on sledges. But dragging a huge stone across dry sand would still be incredibly difficult. So the Egyptians may have used water to help. Experiments have shown that slightly wetting sand can significantly reduce the resistance against a heavy sledge. That means, with enough workers, ropes, wooden sledges, and careful organization, enormous stones could be moved. But that creates another problem. Moving a block across the ground is one thing. Getting it hundreds of feet upward is something completely different. And this is where ramps probably became extremely important. The exact design of the ramps is still debated. Some theories suggest straight ramps. Others suggest ramps that wrapped around the pyramid. There are also theories involving internal ramps. We don't have one surviving blueprint that tells us exactly how the entire pyramid was constructed. But ramps are one of the strongest explanations for how the Egyptians could gradually raise the stones. Imagine the pyramid under construction. At first, the blocks are relatively easy to move, but as the pyramid gets taller, the distance becomes greater. The workers have to move stones higher and higher. The project becomes a gigantic logistical operation. Thousands of workers, stonecutters, engineers, builders, transport workers, and administrators, all working together. And here's something important. For a long time, people imagined that the pyramids were built mainly by armies of slaves. But archaeological evidence gives us a much more complicated picture. Workers' settlements have been discovered near Giza. There is evidence of organized labor, food production, medical care, and teams of workers. Many researchers believe a large part of the workforce consisted of skilled workers and laborers who were organized by the Egyptian state. So this wasn't simply thousands of people randomly carrying rocks. It was a massive government construction project, almost like an ancient megacorporation, except the office was the desert, and the building material weighed several tons. But perhaps the most impressive part isn't even the size of the pyramid, it's the precision. The Great Pyramid is remarkably aligned with the cardinal directions. Its 4 sides face north, south, east, and west, with astonishing accuracy. And remember, these people were doing this thousands of years before GPS. They didn't need futuristic technology. They needed mathematics, observation, experience, and an enormous amount of patience. But why build something this massive in the first place? For the ancient Egyptians, the pyramid wasn't simply a giant building. It was connected to the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. The pyramid was part of a much larger funerary complex, designed to protect the pharaoh's remains and support his transition into the next world. The Egyptians believed death wasn't the end. It was a transformation. And the pharaoh, as the center of the Egyptian state, needed a monument worthy of that role. So generation after generation, workers continued the project. Stone by stone, layer by layer, the pyramid rose above the desert, until eventually the structure was finished. A massive monument made almost entirely from stone, standing more than 100 meters above the ground, and visible for miles. And somehow, after more than 4,500 years, it's still standing. The most fascinating part is that we still don't know every detail. We know a lot about ancient Egyptian engineering. We have archaeological evidence, tools, worker settlements, quarries, and ancient records. But the exact construction process, especially how every stage of the Great Pyramid was organized, remains a subject of research and debate. And maybe that's what makes the pyramids so fascinating. They weren't built by magic. They weren't built by aliens. They were built by humans, using tools that seem incredibly simple by today's standards, but combined with something much more powerful: organization, mathematics, engineering, and thousands of people working toward the same impossible goal. The pyramids remind us of something that is easy to forget. You don't always need advanced technology to build something extraordinary. Sometimes, you need knowledge, patience, and enough people willing to move one stone after another, until eventually, you've built something that survives thousands of years. And that's how the ancient Egyptians may have turned millions of pieces of stone into one of the greatest monuments ever created. Because every question creates another story. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.